Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
All right, how's it going, gentlemen? Welcome to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. As always, I am your host, Scott McKay. You can find me all over social media, usually at Scott McKay. And I also enjoy talking to you guys on Facebook, as always. You can go check out the Mountaintop Summit on Facebook. Join our happy group of guys who are getting better with women and generally becoming better men. And I also invite you to check out the website, which is mountaintoppodcast.com. Lots of free goodies there for you, gentlemen. If you haven't visited in a while, there have been some changes, so be sure to check it out. With me today is a returning guest. He's from Walnut Creek, California. He's a transformational relationship mentor and attachment expert. And I was kind of joking with him out loud before we hit record on this particular show that, a Snap-on Tools guy is also an attachment expert. But of course, since this is a dating and relationship gig around here, we're talking about something completely different. And what we're going to talk about more specifically today is the whole idea of trust in a relationship. We haven't really covered that head on in a show after 300 and some odd episodes. So I think I got the right guest to cover that topic with. It's none other than Dr. Gary Salyer, of course. Gary, welcome back, man.
Thank you, Scott, for having me back. Always a pleasure to be here, my man.
Yeah, man. You know what? My guests love guys who know their stuff. When I have to babysit guests with their own content, it generally doesn't end well. You know, that's when people get cranky and chirp at me. I don't ever have to worry about that with you, sir, because you are a true pro, and I appreciate that. Back at you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Having taught college and graduate school, content is not my problem.
You could do this in your sleep by now, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And sometimes you probably do, if you have the kind of dreams at night I do.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
You know, the first topic, the working title of this particular episode, if you will, was trusting again after divorce. And I think that's a great place to start, even as we're going to cover this larger topic of trust in relationships in general, because man, after there's been a breach in a relationship that frankly, Gary, you probably thought was going to be forever. I mean, you signed up for it to be forever. You gave your vows on your wedding day. She gave her vows to you, but then somehow it ended anyway. Let's talk about the typical ways we get inside our head, or some kind of notion gets inside our head that, hey, you know what? My trust meter is broken after this divorce. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to trust again. I mean, is it even sane or prudent to try to trust again? Give us your thoughts on that to kick this whole thing off.
Sure. Well, the first thing, if we're going to talk about trust, let's define some terms. Let's get to what it really is.
Fair enough.
Fair enough, right? Because trust can mean a lot of different things the same way love does. But there is a science to trust, and there have been a lot of studies on this. The definition of trust, the best definition, is trust is the opposite of betrayal. So trust means, in very simple terms, that when we are interacting, where we are in a relationship and we both have an investment, I will not sacrifice your needs and your interest and your best health or whatever it is, for mine. In other words, I will not seek a win at your loss. I will not gain at your expense. And trust means I will consider your interests on a par with mine. I will not betray you. I will not seek mine at yours. It will be, you can trust that I'm not going to sell you out or put you on the river and send you elsewhere when it comes to your needs. And the second thing I want to say is trust is an emotion, but this is one of the emotions that needs a track record. You could walk into Starbucks and say hi and feel welcomed, enjoy, and all those good things. You don't need a track record. Trust and its correlate confidence is a matter of a track record. It takes time to build up this track record so you know with experience that my beloved or my friend or my partner is, even business or relational, is not going to sacrifice my interest for theirs. They're going to keep it in mind and cherish and protect my interest the same as they do their own. That's trust.
So basically, if you're the functional equivalent of the proverbial boy who cried wolf in a relationship, don't expect anyone to ever trust you because the track record isn't there.
Yes, exactly. And, like when I deal with couples who have gone through infidelity, and infidelity is not just, it's betrayal. You've sacrificed their interest, the interest of the marriage, for your own. It takes time. So what happens is, when I'm dealing with couples, because people don't get this track record idea, say I'm dealing with a couple that has had sexual infidelity, someone who's cheated. It's more often a man than a woman, but I've seen it both ways. A month or two after we started working together, they go, well, why don't you trust me again? Well, because trust takes a track record, especially at that deep of a level. And you've got to remind them, it's going to take you a year or two to renew that sense of trust. You've got to have a longer track record. So, and now some track records, for if it's a small investment, you may not need as much. But for larger investments like relationships, marriages, partnerships, there needs to be a longer track record.
Another component of trust that comes to mind, at least in my estimation, is keeping covenants, doing what I say I'm going to do without fail. Sometimes if I say, yeah, you know what, I'll grab you a gallon of milk at the grocery store and I forget, that's not really a breach of trust. But, these aforementioned marriage vows. I promise to do this. I promise to do that. When I breach that trust, it's kind of a big deal. We're talking about marital infidelity. I think a lot of couples don't go into the relationship even knowing what that means, Gary. They just say, all right, well, infidelity is infidelity. Cheating is cheating. But the husband and wife aren't on the same page as to what that actually means. So the next thing you know, the man may be caught, looking at a naughty video on Pornhub, and the wife goes, oh my God, you've cheated on me. You violated me. That's just like going out and having sex with another woman. And the guy's like, well, wait a minute. All I did was look at some porn. Every guy does that. Or maybe the woman, flirts with the waiter a little bit, banters with him, and the husband goes into a fit of jealousy and says, you've just breached my trust in you because that's infidelity. How dare you even look at another guy because he's got jealousy issues or whatever. Now, right or wrong, whether these are overreactions, these examples I just gave or whatever, it really doesn't matter as long as the couple is on the same page, having communicated about what trust in that context even looks like, right? Am I onto something?
Well, yes. I think probably most women would assume that a man understands these things from the ones I've worked with. But where the betrayal comes, especially from the woman's point of view, is when men become more obsessed with porn, and it does have an addictive quality. Two things happen. They are taking time from the relationship. A lot of times they spend more and more time, and the sex life goes down quite often. So they're saying, I'm going to invest more time in my interest towards visual stimulation than for me to be emotionally and sexually present with you. That's the nature of that betrayal. And rather than investing sexually and emotionally in their spouse, they're putting it somewhere else that does not do the relationship any good. This is a whole different set of trust issues than what it means to trust after divorce, though, Scott. They're both related, but if we're going to do it after divorce, this is the betrayal that leads to divorce.
Well, I was on the same track with you, defining the terms and, kind of building a foundation for what we're going to talk about. And certainly we're going to cover divorce. But my challenge back to you is, what if the couple watches porn together? What if they produce porn together? Then that wouldn't be a betrayal. They're on the same page about that. When it goes unsaid, it's a different story.
If they are on the same page and it is not affecting them emotionally and sexually, if they watch it together and it enhances their relationship, that's between them. If it does not enhance the relationship, that's where the betrayal comes in.
Got it. I think that's crystal clear. So
yes.
Now that we have some measure of what trust involves, what it's about, what it entails, before we dive into divorce and the trust issue surrounding that, Give us a little bit more on what betrayal means and what it looks like.
Okay. So say she finds out that he is looking at porn and their sex life has gone down, right? All that in that hour and a half in the evening, in the morning that he says he's too busy to spend any time with her to ask her how her day's gone. She finds that he's looking at a set of double Ds. Okay. And then she gets, after a couple of complaints or more, and she goes out and purposely spends $5,000 on Visa to to say, I am upset. You're not listening to me. She's going to betray him financially to try to get his emotions. So now we've got two sets of betrayals. You betray me emotionally and sexually. Now I betray you. And this is a lot of how betrayal goes, as means of trying to say, how can we get back to actually finding something that is trustworthy? So once betrayal gets in a relationship, it's easy for the other partner to say, well, if they're not going to look at my interest, then I'm going to look after mine. And if he can cost me my interest, I can cost him or I can cost her. And so when there's a lack of trust, it's a real downward spiral.
I was going to say, you used almost the exact same phraseology I would have. It sounds like a death spiral.
Yeah.
And it really comes back around full circle to this idea of looking out for each other's best interests.
That's exactly what trust is. Looking out for each other's best interests. In a great relationship, the metric of trust is, I will not only not betray you, I will actively support and look after and nurture your interests.
Yes.
I will have your back. I will be there to support your dreams and to make sure that my needs, and there's always some conflict, just existentially, but I'm not going to systemically, ignore your needs so that mine can be met. I will have your back. I will make sure that when we build a universe together, those laws of trust will always bear. You can trust the force of gravity, so to speak, in our relationship. It's not going to be here one day and not there another. It's setting up an ecosystem where there's beautiful laws of trust and reciprocity and caring and respect that both people can learn to rely and relax.
What comes to mind as you're talking is another extremely unfortunate downward spiral that I think a lot of guys listening can relate to. And man, if you can't relate to this, good on you, because I wouldn't wish this situation on my worst enemy. But a lot of times, either a man or a woman can have a trust issue that morphs into something completely unreasonable.
Mm-hmm.
They're overly jealous to the point of being abusive and start accusing the partner who they say they love and are acting in the best interest of all sorts of things that this person's not even really doing. Like in my first marriage, my wife was clinically schizophrenic and was living in a different reality. And one of the ways she gaslit me very effectively was I would go to the grocery store and come home with $100 worth of groceries 40 minutes later, and she would buttonhole me about having been with that blonde bimbo again. You're out with your girlfriend. And it seemed like anytime I was apart from her for any given amount of time, she accused me of sexually cheating on her.
Mm-hmm.
And it started feeling, Gary, like I had been imprisoned for a crime I just didn't commit. And that's like one of the emptiest, most frustrating feelings in the world. And I'll tell you, it never really came to this. But my thought as a normal, rational human being was, well, I might as well go cheat on her. If I'm going to get the brunt of the punishment and the blame and get shamed for this, I may as well have something to be guilty of. So at least it feels like the shoe fits. Isn't that a twisted, sad dynamic? But I think a lot of guys can relate to that.
No, a lot of guys can't. Sometimes some women can too, Scott.
Sure.
And I call this the next page for the X. There's probably, usually with that, there's a history of infidelity and cheating in their background. And once a brain gets grooved to looking for those clues and that someone is cheating, then it gets this perceptual filters worse, looking for, in essence, ways I can be betrayed, ways they're going to cheat. And that's a killer in relationships, because when somebody is being trustworthy and somebody is accusing them of that, that's a betrayal of trust as well, because now the person who is being falsely accused cannot trust the emotional stability of this relationship. Because where there's cheating, accusations of cheating, there's usually volatility somewhere, or distancing, but usually volatility. And then you don't feel comfortable being there. You don't know when Mount Vesuvius is going to fly off. I had a relationship like that many years ago. And after a few months of, literally, if they couldn't get me on the phone, well, where did you go? What hotel were you using? I said, this isn't going to work. It's not my job to help you heal from what happened with your ex-husband.
Well, that takes a lot of intestinal fortitude in the context of a relationship to even stand up for yourself.
It's a right to assert. It's a right to have proper boundaries. And that person does need to work that through, because making the next pay for the exes is not love. The brain is always in protective mode. When it's in that sort of protection from me getting hurt, the brain has two functions. It can be in red protection mode, or it can be in green connection mode, but you can't do both at the same time with the human brain. So all the connection goes away, which is a betrayal of what love is supposed to be. And nobody wants to defend, especially against somebody else. Now, your ex-wife was also mentally ill, and schizophrenics are known for a lot of paranoid stuff. So, but you can still see that in normal middle class craziness a lot of times, and it really is incumbent upon the person who is doing the accusations to make sure that they're right. And then, of course, there's the women that I have worked with in couples that they had strong suspicions, and the guy would say, "No, I'm not. It's just." Then it was, "Oh yeah, there is some. It's just a friend," and that's the phrase that's used. And then pretty soon you find out that all the accusations were true. There's that other side to muddy the waters. Because if they are having an affair, the person having an affair will gaslight and deny and twist things. And so when somebody has been cheated on, it does a number on their ability to trust later on.
It's almost like the Martha Mitchell effect, right? The person who is accused of being the crazy one is actually the one who's right all along.
Well, yes. And I've seen that other side too. All of this is examples, and then of course, when you carry this mistrust of whatever leads to the demise of the relationship into the divorce, this is what we're kind of talking about here, is if someone has been cheated on in a previous relationship or marriage and it comes into the next, it does no good for that next relationship. And frequently it sets up to have the very same experience, therefore confirming I can't trust the one.
Well, see, when the only tool you have in the box is the hammer of betrayal, everything starts looking like a nail until that gets healed.
Exactly. And, I had an experience where I had a relationship, this was decades ago, where she cheated on me. And that was the first time. The first time it happens, it does a number on it, because it's like gravity stopped working for a while. Because you have a certain expectation, you expect love to be a certain way, and then you get this huge betrayal. And the next woman I dated, one day we'd been dating 4 or 5 months, and I walked in and there was a plumber, just a normal plumber working on the kitchen. And suddenly I see another man in there, and I pop an attitude. I don't directly accuse her, but she figures out what's happened, and he leaves. And then all 5'1" of her puts me in a corner, and she goes, "Look here." She goes, "I have never cheated in my life. I'm never going to cheat. And I do not need to pay for her sins. And this is not fair."
Good for her.
She goes, "This is not fair. I don't deserve this." And I'm glad she did, because making her pay for that previous partner, that was so unfair. And I'm grateful. And I said, "You're right. I'm wrong." And
good for you.
Yeah. And then she looks at me and she, this which tells you how trusted. She goes, "Good. Thank you. Now let's go make love."
I've heard that storyline play out before.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
But we've got to make sure that when we've been betrayed, And divorce that's the subject of this, is a huge form of betrayal, and not actively sometimes it is, but we feel like life's betrayed us, love's betrayed us, because we had expected it to be lasting. And it can be hard to trust again afterwards.
I have this dynamic that I observed and coined a term for years ago now, Gary.
Mm-hmm.
I call it the divorce 50-50 factor.
Yes.
Okay. When a couple meets online, or, maybe they're coworkers, doesn't matter where they met, but they go on a first date and they're sitting across from each other and they're both divorced. It's almost like the standoff at the end of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Who's going to shoot first? And they're trying to size up whether this person, were they the person who caused the divorce to become necessary? Like Yogi Berra, thank you for making this day necessary. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
Thanks, but no thanks. Or are you more of a quote unquote victim of whatever your ex did to you?
Yeah.
And see, if you're a cheater and that's why you're divorced, I may think once a cheater, always a cheater, and I'm probably the next to be cheated on. But if you got cheated on by your spouse or abused by your spouse, or they went crazy or were drunk or something, then perhaps I can take a deep breath and go, all right, okay, perhaps this person wasn't the one who caused the divorce. And this idea is built on the fact that, relatively speaking, of course, there are exceptions, but two people who get married for the right reasons and are good to each other and look out for each other's best interests, relatively speaking, like I said, they get divorced less often. Those are the kind of relationships that are built to last. So when a divorce happens, usually it's in the context of somebody did somebody wrong. So
yes. Mm-hmm.
Now I will also fully acknowledge that sometimes both people in a marriage can be the reason why that marriage wasn't going to work. Neither one of them were ready to be one half of a great relationship, and both of them were cheating on each other and committing all kinds of relationship offenses against each other. So it's 50-50 at best. But even during that early dating stage, not only can people feel that lack of trust towards the other person because of them being divorced, or because something bad happened to me in my own divorce context, but they may feel a little insecurity. Am I trustworthy? Are people going to automatically judge me because I'm divorced? And it just creates a whole brouhaha. It's a mess.
Well, it is. And when you're looking post-divorce, first off, I work with couples. And I can say, yeah, I've had a few couples that was 80-20 one way or the other in terms of quote-unquote blame. But most of the time, both people have contributed. It's at best 60-40. Most couples are prodding or projecting onto the other one their past pain. And that defensive reaction when the one gets plastered with it, like we just talked, creates a pattern of defense that hits them right in their own past pain. And you get these couples, when you drag past pain into a relationship and you haven't worked it through, they eventually become dueling arguments or dueling distancing cycles in the relationship. This is why the subtitle of my book, Safe to Love Again, is how to release the pain of past relationships. And then you get to create a love you deserve, right? It's so the big key for developing trust is to work through those old feelings, whether it's betrayal or I wasn't very worthy, because when you're talking about that scenario, they're checking each other out. There's another level of mistrust too. And that is, especially after my second divorce, I didn't trust myself to know how to choose anymore. It was one thing when the first one went through. The second one did a real number on my confidence to choose. And what you have to do, when you bring in that distrust, and after you've been hurt, and some part naturally wants to protect you, that protection mode can often be done. It builds up walls. It says, I'll never get hurt. I won't invest fully. I'll play as keep it safe. And the other one realizes, hey, they're playing it on their terms. I better keep it on mine. And pretty soon you have two me's that are hesitating just enough to make sure they can get out without getting hurt again, or they won't get fully invested because God only knows what I could lose. And now you've got two me's instead of a we. Whenever is a couple that thinks that being a couple is two me's interacting, this is the very thing that creates the ground for mistrust, because a me is thinking about its own interest, not the others.
Well, what's required there is this brave version of vulnerability, not the weak version of vulnerability where I'm letting somebody run roughshod over me. But there has to be an ability to acknowledge my own position and reveal to the other person, hey, I want to look out for your best interest. I just don't know if I'm equipped right now, because after all, especially when people meet for the first time, they may be looking at their scenario through two completely different lenses. And until they trust each other, even at a baseline level enough to reveal that to each other and talk about it a little, they're basically stuck in their own respective realities, despite what the other person may be going through. And that's not really a good precedent to set for a healthy relationship, now is it?
No. In fact, in every couple that's ever come to me, Scott, they don't have a we. The problem is always the we. My real client is setting up a we, and a good we, a healthy we. We're not talking enmeshment or codependency. Yeah, that's a we, but that's not what I'm talking about. A real we does not betray. It sets up a field of cherishing and protecting, where you cherish the other person's interest in who they are and you protect them. But every couple that I've ever worked with, for whatever reason, from childhood pain, maybe the two of them never learned because this culture doesn't really teach what good relationship is, they eventually don't know how to create that we. They stay in me mode, and me's tend to operate on my interest, and they set up this field of, I'm not fully trusting this relationship. They may not know it. You have to be able to have two me's that can separate, have their own interests, and come together so that each other has each other's back, that each other is a home port for the other's heart. Unless you have that we, I guarantee you there will be the grounds for at least mistrust, and more fertily later on, if they get into acrimonious arguments, I guarantee you there'll be more and more acts of betrayal. A lot of times, couples that cannot get the attunement and the commitment and closeness they want, they act on their own. And the one who feels hurt, and usually it's both that feels hurt, then feel they have the right to hurt the other one in order to protest. And a lot of times, these betrayals, these small and large acts of betrayals, are efforts to get attunement, to get empathy. A partner says, you have not listened to me, so I'm going to go out and I'm going to spend all of my evenings with my female friends or my male friends so that you understand what it's like to feel alone. That is not only betraying the we, but it's also that act of what we call perpetration from the victim position. Once they feel like a victim, now they've got the right to be a perpetrator and hurt the other one. It's frequently an attempt to get attunement or empathy. It's just a very bad way of getting at it. And then you've got betrayal at multiple levels and mistrust at multiple levels going on.
Well, two things come to mind there, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Hopefully not with the hammer of distrust.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
But with a regular hammer. The first idea that came to mind is this individualism, this independence is celebrated in our culture.
It is.
And of course, both of the words I just used are euphemisms for selfishness in context. You should get what you want. Whisper 3 simple words into her ear and make her spread her legs. Whisper 3 simple words into his ear, this obsession phrase, and he'll never look at another woman again and give you his credit card and take you shopping and love you forever. Women get married for the marriage and the wedding, not for the man. And then they're stuck living with this guy. I mean, the level with which people are narcissistic, even in the context of trying to find a mate, is breathtaking, and this is celebrated. The other thing that's unfortunately celebrated more and more in today's culture is victimhood, as you talked about. As you were talking about earlier, about 5-10 minutes ago, maybe it's a 60-40 ratio of who was at fault when a divorce happens. But even if it's 99% to 1, or dare I say 100 to nothing, Gary, the person who feels victimized does a lot better putting aside that victimhood and saying, okay, what could I do better? How can I be a better partner? What will I do next time? Even if it's repairing my broken picker, for gosh sakes, I'll go out there and do better, because the victimhood mentality foments weakness, and your partner doesn't need you to be weak. Your partner shouldn't want you to be weak. You should both be strong together. You should make each other stronger. Like I say, Gary, 1 + 1 in a relationship should equal 3 or 4 or 50, not just simply 2. But this idea of keep your hands off my stack, what can I get out of this relationship, is not going to be something your alleged partner is ever going to want to buy into, especially, I might add, wait for it, if they're busy being selfish themselves. So this is a deadly 1-2 punch, isn't it? Both of us are selfish and both of us are victims. Then how is that relationship supposed to last? How's it supposed to go the long haul? It can't. It's flawed.
Well, it is. And victim and perpetrator modes happen all the time in marriages, and they don't, in partnerships and relationships, and they don't work. You were discussing something earlier. When people look at their relationships, one of the phrases in the new book I'm writing is I'm going to have a chapter on rat yourself out first. People, you were talking about the victim being one down in a relationship, but there's also one up, okay? And both of them betray the interests of the we. And I guarantee you, almost every person who habitually takes the one-up position, narcissists that way, male grandiosity or female grandiosity can go there. More men tend to go to the one-up, more women go to the one-down, but they often switch them back and forth like a teeter-totter. That one-up position, underneath it, I guarantee you they either saw it as a childhood where the mother or father was constantly grandiose, or they were one down, and you guessed it. Some part said, I will never be one down again. I will be one up, and I'll make sure they're below me. And then, of course, the one below doesn't feel loved, and they usually find somebody who doesn't have a full right to assert or to have their needs met, to have a full we. And what happens, real relational health, real trust, comes when you're neither one up nor one down, when there's neither grandiosity nor inferiority. And most therapists have been trained to empower the one who's one down, the victim. But what we don't do very good is pulling down to relational health those who are one up. Let me give an example from the Gottman research. The Gottmans did research on couples, John Gottman did at the University of Washington, and he videotaped about 3,000 couples who spent a day at what was called the Love Lab. And scientists carefully, videotaped them the entire 24 hours there, took a lot of measurements of their stress hormones, and, behind every mirror in the little cottage was this guy's camera and a scientist. I saw this tape of the original research in which the man comes in pretty much one up, and the woman is a kind of a resentful one down. And this is how it rolls. He says, well, doctor, you're going to find out when you look at these tapes that she's volatile. And it just happens out of nowhere. You're going to find out that she gets angry. She just snaps on her anger hat. And out of nowhere, she's volatile and angry. And you're just going to notice that out of nowhere, she can just turn a sunny day into a tornado. Gottman, just being a researcher, goes, takes notes. And she has that sort of browbeaten, angry, oh, here it comes again. He doesn't understand me. So they go through the entire weekend together. The scientists measure everything, and they are measuring interactions every 6 seconds for what's going on. And when they do their analysis, they call the couple back in. And when they get the analysis, it is amazing. This is so paradigmatic for understanding how victims and perpetrators. He's claiming to be the victim of all of her anger, right? But he's actually one up and grandiose in the relation. He says, you're right. When we looked at the tapes, we found out that she does get angry and volatile, and it seems to come out of nowhere. She does do that, and he gets this smug look on his face. And then he says, however, when we did the deeper analysis, we found that 90% of the time it is preceded by a remark or a look of contempt on your face. You are far more in control of this pattern than you think. He was noticing her reaction, but never noticing his act of perpetration, the contempt, right? And contempt is a huge thing in relationships. Women who receive contempt in a relationship from a spouse are 9 times at risk for breast cancer. We know that it's the acid rain of most relationships. His victimhood he could not see her victimhood. The fact that he was often being grandiose and contemptuous, bringing him down. If he stopped the contempt and he stopped his perpetration, he wouldn't be such a victim.
Once again, same relationship, 2 different lenses, 2 different movies being watched. One relationship.
And frequently my job is to show couples where they're contributing to the very pattern, how they're edging it on, so to speak, based on past relationship experience, and how they are actually getting there, the very thing they dread by some of their actions. Because most couples will not rat themselves out. One couple, he comes in complaining and says, I got home after a week in Chicago and she didn't even pick me up at the airport. I don't feel cherished. I don't feel supported. And then she goes, well, wait a minute. You got all angry at me because of whatever it was, and you told me not to pick you up. And then she goes, yeah, but you didn't pick up. And they kept backing up. They backed it up 11 times. Each of them not saying what they did, only pointing fingers at the other. This is no way to do trust. Okay, I would love to hear like the man who walks in and says, my wife isn't sleeping with me. And I don't blame her. I mean, I spend 2 or 3 hours every night doing video games, and then I spend my weekends golfing. It's no wonder with this little contact. I don't hear that. They come in claiming, I've been in this marriage and I just don't get any. So long as 2 me's are holding their own interest and never looking at the others or how they're expecting it, they cannot build trust. And then there will be all sorts of distancing or volatile moments, trying to protest, trying to get back to what they really want. What they want is a relationship where they feel loved and they can trust each other. The best way to create trust in a relationship is stop thinking about me and pointing fingers at the other me and start taking responsibility for yourself, and then shifting into the other person, saying, what does the other person need from me that I haven't given them?
Well, on the surface, that sounds very practical.
It is.
But a lot of people are going to say, well, that's easy for you to say, Dr. Gary Salyer, but what's the first step I take if I'm having trust issues in a relationship, or I feel like I'm going to have trust issues if I get into another relationship? I mean, what I would say is the first step seems almost obvious to me. It's foundational. Find a woman who you understand. Find someone who gets you and you get them, because I see too many couples who don't even understand what's going on in each other's heads. It's way too common for someone to call me and go, well, my partner said this last night. What did they mean by that? And my answer, as I've shared before on this show, is always, I don't know. Did you ask them? Because they would know better than me. And it's always frustration on the other end when I say that. It's like, well, of course I didn't. I can't. It's your job to figure it out. But I think there's a fear there of what they might hear if they ask. And so they would rather just plug that perceived need according to their own parameters, and that doesn't help trust,
I think alignment, compatibility, like you're talking about, understanding is important. But what I think is underneath that is the foundation of my work is you really have to release the past pain, or it will creep into the relationship. If we haven't released it, then we are afraid it will happen again, and there will be inevitable ways we protect ourselves rather than connect. And then some part of us maybe doesn't share, so the other person can't understand us. The foundation, if you want to start building a trustworthy relationship, so long as you're feeling the old hurt, whether that's unsafe or unwelcomed, or you weren't worthy, or you were not cherished, or you were disempowered, and some part of your brain is looking to receive that again, there's no way that relationship, old pain, doesn't bleed into the new, and you go, there it is again.
Yeah. Until you get healed, that's what you're going to keep expecting. That's going to seem normal to you. Yes. The old theme of considering normal the kind of relationship I was raised under. And then we get into a relationship that somehow resembles our mother and father's relationship in its brokenness. And then it's lather, rinse, repeat until we do the healing you're talking about. It doesn't have to be that way. That's a simple but very freeing realization for a lot of people that sometimes is easier said than done, for sure.
Yeah. You have to do the deep healing so you can walk in with a clean me that can attract another clean me, so to speak, and then create a we. Yeah, is there compatibility? Yeah, but what the research shows out is compatibility is not a predictor of marital lastingness, so to speak. It's not for longevity. It's the quality of the marital friendship. You can have people with very different values, not totally different. There needs to be some alignment. But differences is not the problem. It's not being able to understand each other, communicate love and acceptance and understanding, where they're the real predictor of trust and longevity in a relationship is when you are each other's best friends.
Yes.
Best friends.
Right.
70% of all men and women say they want the same thing. Here, there is no difference. 70% of both genders, both sexes say the same thing. The biggest thing they're looking for is the quality of the marital friendship. Or what I say in my book, Safe to Love Again, do they feel welcomed with joy, worthy and nourished, cherished and protected, and empowered with choice? If they're feeling and giving and receiving those four, it's a pretty good relationship. Take any of them away, and you start getting more and more dysfunctionality.
You know, one of the grave dangers of consuming mainstream dating advice for men is you start hearing the same cliches over and over again. Mm-hmm. And one of the most shop-worn of those cliches in the men's dating advice world is staying out of the just be friends zone. Yes. And unfortunately, Gary, a lot of guys focus on the word friends in that conceptual statement rather than the word just. Mm-hmm. Because being friends with the woman of your dreams is the very best state imaginable, as you've just carefully described. It's when you're just friends and she's not attracted to you that trouble arises. So I wanted to go ahead and throw that on the table just for the good of the cause. Gary, I think now is the time where I should send guys to your website so they can learn more about what you do and get an even deeper dive into what we're talking about here, because, you know, this is an iceberg that we've really just seen the tip of so far. So guys, go ahead and visit Dr. Gary Salyer at mountaintop.podcast.com/love guide, LOVEGUIDE. And I'm just going to let you know, full disclosure, you can go to GarySalyer.com/love guide and get to the same place. But it is my custom to make it a redirect from mountaintoppodcast.com. And I've done that this time too. So mountaintoppodcast.com/love guide or GarySalyer.com/love guide. And Gary Salyer, it's been a fantastic show. This has been just jam packed with information. I suspect we've left these guys wanting more, which is what your website's for. But meanwhile, thank you so much for returning to the show and sharing your wisdom with us, sir.
Thank you, Scott. Always a pleasure. For everybody that listened, thank you for listening.
Yeah, man. And gentlemen, if you have not been to mountaintop.podcast.com in a while, we are just coming off 2 episodes that are retrospectives into the first 9 episodes of The Chick Whisperer. Back in the day, 2007 to be exact. If you missed out on those shows, they were a lot of fun. It was kind of a pattern interrupt, as I referred to it as. And you can still go to mountaintopodcast.com/lost episodes and get the full and complete version of all 9 of those episodes to listen to at your leisure. While you're at mountaintopodcast.com, you can also download my free book, Sticking Points Solved. And you can also get on my calendar to talk to me for free for 25 minutes about what's on your mind relative to women, dating, relationships, whatever's on your mind, gentlemen. All of that is there for you and more at mountaintoppodcast.com. And oh, by the way, be sure to check out the latest master class. I do those once per month for you guys, and I don't leave anything on the table. Those master classes are action-packed and fluff-free. All of that is there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X and Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X and Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X and Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.